Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. What does the economy's pivot mean to real estate investors, a crypto crash, and as a rental property owner, how do you keep yourself from getting sued? And what are the top reasons that landlords get sued today? And a rich dad advisor father-son succession plan today on Get Rich Education. The EQRP system now allows you to shield up to $700,000 of income from taxes every year. My friend Damian Lupo informed me that checkbook IRAs have been made illegal by the U.S. tax court. So if you have a checkbook IRA, your holdings are now disqualified with taxes and penalties up to 50%. But don't panic, Damian and the EQRP team can fix this. This way you can invest your 401k or IRA in real estate, gold, Bitcoin, and even your own business. So whether you're a full-time investor, retired, or even a dentist with dozens of employees, if you're listening, you qualify. The EQRP works. It's the solution. You'll control your retirement money, kill UBIT, and pay way less taxes. I encourage you to learn more about this strategy and free up your retirement money. Get the newest EQRP special report. Text GRE to 307-213-3475. Text GRE to 307-213-3475. Mid-South homebuyers, with over 2 decades as the nation's highest-rated turnkey provider, their empathetic property managers use your return on investment as their North Star. It's no wonder smart investors line up to get their completely renovated income properties like it's the newest iPhone. Headquartered in Memphis with their globally attractive cash flows, Mid-South has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and 4,000 houses renovated. There is zero markup on maintenance, let that sink in, and they average a 98.9% occupancy rate with an industry-leading 3.5-year average renter term. Every home they offer you will have brand new components, a bumper-to-bumper 1-year warranty, new 30-year roofs, and wait for it, a high-quality renter in an astounding price range, $100,000 to $150,000. Get to know Mid-South. Enjoy cash flow from day one at midsouthhomebuyers.com. That's midsouthhomebuyers.com.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Hey, welcome to GRE. From Las Vegas, Nevada to Las Cruces, New Mexico, and across 188 nations worldwide, I'm Keith Weinhold. You are back for the 424th consecutive week of the Get Rich Education podcast, that abundantly minded place where financially free beats debt free. They want you to think that you can't do it. They want you to think that you have to live a life of less and eat Costco samples for dinner and eke out a small existence and pay down low interest rate debt. Oh, instead you can do what we do here. You are compounding your cash flows and you're leveraging your way to real durable wealth. Prominent attorney and rich dad advisor Garrett Sutton and his son will be with us shortly. This is the first show where they're announcing their father-son succession plan to the world. But first, there's a lot happening in the investing world. Look, the ideal inflation rate is 0, just like the ideal theft rate is 0. But this is clearly not the world that you are living in. When the latest inflation number was reported at 7.7%, you know what? This is kind of like getting an apple at Halloween. It's disappointing, but yet it's still deemed to be healthy. Maybe only because that was actually the lowest inflation reading in 9 months. So let's study how news like this affects an economy, because a lower inflation reading is surely going to happen again sometime. All right, well, this news, it made traditional markets surge. Moody's Analytics prominent chief economist Mark Zandi, he made the call that inflation has definitely peaked. The 30-year fixed mortgage rate fell an eye-popping 0.6% on this lower inflation news. Yeah, it fell that much in just one day. That's Mortgage News Daily's record single-day drop, all time. And this is because investors, they see what is called a Fed pivot. If lower inflation persists, and that's the new trend that we're on, if that's the case, well, then they see that the Fed will no longer raise interest rates 0.75% at every meeting like they have been. Yeah, almost everyone hopes that point guard Jay Powell clanks a three-pointer at next month's meeting and maybe only raises them a half point instead. You do care about the inflation rate. Of course, you care about it as a consumer, but here with your investing, you and I are lucratively immersed in the worlds of real estate pays 5 ways and the inflation triple crown. All right, so lower inflation, that correlates with lower mortgage rates. And understand that a future with both lower inflation and lower mortgage rates, that would nearly be a wash for you. Yeah, because if both do trend down over time, here's how that looks for your return on investment. If both inflation and interest rates go lower, then on your real estate, you're going to make less from inflation profiting on your long-term fixed interest rate debt, and you're going to make more from cash flow and principal pay down. As a real estate investor that gets paid 5 ways, you've got so many profitable levers, and some of those are up over time, and some of those are down over time. That's why you generally just want to keep investing in real estate despite the levels of your various profit centers. I think it's easy to make the case that affordable rental housing, that's going to be the best performing asset class over the next 10 years. It is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It is a durable get-rich-slow strategy. And speaking of get-rich-quick, some cryptocurrency schemes, I think they are that thing. With the crypto winter that turned even worse recently, I've got so much to say about that, but I'm not going to because I largely wrote about that in our newsletter last week with my take on what happened in crypto and these de facto bank runs on crypto banks. Crypto exchanges are much like crypto banks and their contagion effect. So I'm not going to get into all that here today. The key takeaway, though, is that 2022, this is the 2008 of crypto. That's how bad it is. It is analogous to 2008's failure of Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and the mortgage meltdown. Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary and quarterback Tom Brady, they endorsed the recent prominent failed crypto exchange, which again is sort of like a crypto bank, and it's called FTX. And they invested in it themselves, these prominent figures, and they got others to invest in it. The Miami Heat's arena, yeah, the NBA basketball team, the Miami Heat's, their arena was named FTX. They terminated that. The leader of FTX, he was a guy that was previously seen as crypto's savior, and he took a devastating L. And is crypto a get-rich-quick scheme? No, not always. In fact, I maintain that Bitcoin itself has some redeeming qualities, like it has a finite supply of 21 million. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. And the fact that Bitcoin is decentralized. But one big problem with storing crypto on these exchanges like FTX and Celsius and BlockFi is that what it does is that it centralizes crypto. And I don't believe that centralization is the vision that Bitcoin's inventor Satoshi had in the first place. I am in beautiful and pristine Anchorage, AK today, and I'm going to be spending much of this coming winter in Henderson, Nevada. Nevada also happens to be the home state of our 2 guests today. And if you prefer, either now or later, you can watch the video of today's interview on YouTube. Of course, the name of our channel is Get Rich Education. Well, we've had Rich Dad Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki here on the show 4 times, and our first of 2 guests today needs a little introduction because he's been here before too. He is Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad legal advisor. He's a corporate attorney, asset protection expert, and best-selling author who has sold more than 1 million books now. Gosh, congratulations on that. His books guide entrepreneurs and investors. So welcome back to Get Rich Education, Garrett Sutton.
Thanks, Keith. Pleasure to be with you again.
And it's the debut appearance of Garrett's son here on the show. He just graduated from the University of Wyoming's College of Law this spring. And hey, maybe equally impressively to me, he has attended a number of seminars with the Rich Dad team. Not sure if you ever graduate or get any kind of degree there at the Rich Dad School, if you will. But in any case, welcome to GRE, Ted Sutton.
Thanks for having me on, Keith.
Ted, we are dying to know, when you're in the office there, do you call Garrett Dad or do you call him boss?
He's been my boss for my entire life. I just can't call him that. It's always been Dad, and it's always going to be Dad. And it's funny because whenever I talk to everyone else at the office here, I refer to him as Dad. And, you know, they understand and they're cool with it. But it's just physically impossible for me to call him boss. So he's Dad.
When coworkers hear you call him Dad there in the office, I'm sure they know who you are talking about. And if you're watching in the video version here, you can see that the two are physically together. They physically work together there at Corporate Direct offices based in Reno, Nevada. Garrett, tell us your thoughts when you learned that Ted wanted to attend law school and follow in your footsteps, because that's not the undergraduate track that Ted had begun with.
That's right, Keith. He was at the University of Utah studying mining engineering and spent a summer in Chile, which he can tell you about, and decided that mining engineering wasn't for him. And I suggested that maybe law would be good, and it took him a few weeks, but he decided that that would be a good track for him as well. And for us here at Corporate Direct, it's great because I'm not selling the business. I'm not bringing anybody new in. I'm just going to continue. It's going to be a family operation, and he's going to take over Corporate Direct, and we're going to keep it going. So all the employees have their jobs, and we're just going to continue on. So it's been great that Ted went to the University of Wyoming Law School, just passed the Wyoming bar exam.
Yeah.
And is going to take over.
Tell us about that, Ted, because really it wasn't all that long ago that you spent 3 summer months at a mine in Chile when you were still pursuing this mining and engineering track. And I imagine also that was summer in North America, so it was winter down there in Chile where you were at this mine. Tell us about that.
Yep, it was their winter and our summer.
Yeah.
And I was down there for 3 months. And this was the summer right before my last year of undergrad. And as you mentioned, I worked 3 months there. It was an open pit copper mine in the middle of the Atacama Desert. It's the middle of nowhere, and it's also the driest place on earth. It rained once there, and that was the first precipitation that they had in 2 years. So definitely out there, very remote. But with that said, I did enjoy my time there. I got to shadow a bunch of people in different parts of the mine, and I got to interact with a lot of the miners, and I got along very well with them because here's this 6'1" gringo, and how many Americans do they get to see? Yeah, and it was a good experience. I enjoyed my time there, but it made me realize that I didn't really want to make a career out of that just because you're living in a remote area. And a lot of people switch jobs every few years. So it made me realize that this might not be something I want to do. Now, after I graduated with my degree in mining engineering, you know, I thought about my experience in Chile, and it kind of felt like I reached the end of the road. And I remember I was eating brunch with my parents in Salt Lake the day after I graduated. And we were sort of brainstorming, like, what could I do next? And I remember Dad proposed to me. He said, well, Ted, I mean, you could go to law school. You could work for me and eventually take over my practice. And at first I'm like, wait, why the hell would I want to do that? You know, I wasn't really a big fan of reading and writing. And like, who wants to work with their dad? Like, who's crazy enough to do that? Well, I mean, apparently me, but I thought about it for a few weeks, and I've traveled with him before. I've done some seminars with Robert around the world, and I got to see the impact that he's had on people, that Robert's had on people, and how they've done a lot to help people. So after a few weeks, I said, you know what? I'll take a leap of faith, go to law school. And it made me realize that it'll put me in the best position to help the most amount of people. And that's something that I really value. So eventually I took that leap of faith, and I haven't looked back since.
So you had to work in a place as bleak as the Atacama Desert to want to go work with Dad. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's pretty
accurate.
Good
way to put
it. In any case, all right, Ted, so you changed and pursued a law school track. You completed law school at the University of Wyoming. And not that you're going to throw your alma mater under the bus there, but can you tell us, did your law school track at the University of Wyoming, and congratulations upon graduating and passing the bar exam, but did that formal education experience, did that translate well into what you're doing inside there at Corporate Direct with your dad every day?
That's a great question, Keith. The way I like to think of it is that academia and the real world are like two parallel lines that don't intersect.
Yeah.
I've been in higher education for 8 years, 5 years undergrad, 3 years of law school. And there's definitely a lot of things that I didn't learn there that are very applicable to the real world. For example, all of this financial education, your channel, what Robert teaches, what Graham Stephan teaches, all these other people. In that regard, not really, but the ABA does require law students to have some real world experience before they graduate. So I did this clinic where I was the student director, and I helped set up LLCs for clients, which is exactly what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
So that was probably the only thing that was applicable to the real world. So what you learn in law school is very different from being a practicing attorney. There's a lot of things that you don't know. But I would say overall, I did get a little bit of experience. So it was somewhat relevant to what I'm doing now.
Garrett is a rather prolific author. He's had a lot of success, like I touched on earlier. And this year, Garrett, you published a new book called Fail Not Fail. And if you're watching in the video, you can see that Garrett is holding up that book now. You can,
as I've been taught to do.
Yeah, well trained. What's a purple covered book? It's another book in the Rich Dad series there. And I happen to know, Ted, that you wrote Appendix A of that book because that satisfied your law school writing requirements. So maybe that's one place where it helped translate somewhat. But I want to talk about some things, and you touched on it, Ted. It's the fact that a lot of what you do there, you set up LLCs. So really, you perform preventive measures for real estate investors and business owners so that they have the right corporate structure in place, that corporate veil there, which is what the title Fail Not Fail alludes to. I think a real estate investor, oftentimes, they think about a line of defense, a defense against attacks from plaintiffs, from litigants. Oftentimes, you mentioned LLCs earlier, we might think of our first line of defense, or at least I do, is just in being an ethical operator in the first place. That's part of what our mission is here, providing housing that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional to people. Maybe we can abolish the term slumlord if everyone went ahead and did that. But if you're an ethical operator, I kind of think of that as the first line of defense. So, Garrett, can you talk to us about lines of defense? Maybe it's being an ethical operator first, and then there's their insurance layer before one gets to their corporate structure and the protection there. So can you talk to us about lines of defense?
Keith, I really like you mentioning the ethical operator as the first line of defense. I mean, I own properties. I want to make sure that my properties are safe. I don't want anybody getting hurt. So that's the first line. The second line would be insurance. If someone does get hurt, you want insurance to be able to cover their injuries. So insurance is the second line of defense, but we know that insurance companies have an economic incentive to not cover every claim. And so the third line of defense are these LLCs, and not only forming the LLC, but maintaining them properly. That's what Fail Not Fail is about. So you're right. There are three lines of defense: ethical operations, insurance, and then the asset protection that is provided by an LLC.
I want to talk to you about the LLCs in a moment, but when we talk about that second line of defense being the insurance, is there anything with what we typically think of as a landlord insurance policy that someone should think of before they go ahead and sign a contract and pay that premium? Anything particular that one should have right with that insurance layer first?
Great question, because a lot of people will take title to the property in their individual name. The insurance policy will be in their individual name, and then they will transfer title to the LLC. But you have to let the insurance company know that the premium, the insurance company, the policy rather, needs to cover the LLC as well as you personally. So you'll have the insurance premium. Typically, it'll be in your name because it's cheaper that way. But then you have to let the insurance company know to list the LLC on title to the property as an additional insured. And that way you're covered. We've seen cases where insurance companies have denied coverage because title was in the name of the LLC, the insurance premium was in the name of the individual. So that's a key element to all of this, Keith.
That is a really great takeaway and what we're calling your second line of defense here. Okay, so we've got being an ethical operator, that second line of defense, which is insurance, and that third line of defense, which is your corporate structure or your entity. And we'll talk about that shortly. But Garrett, I just wonder about another layer, or maybe if this can't be imposed as a distinct layer, maybe it's something separate and something additional. It's something I talk about here on the show a lot. Oftentimes it makes a lot of sense for a real estate investor to hold a low equity position because leverage really can create a lot of wealth for someone. That way you're using other people's money, more of the bank's money, rather than your own. But can holding a low equity position actually be part of an effective asset protection strategy for that real estate investor at the same time?
Sure. Debt is a form of asset protection. You know, if you have a $400,000 property and the bank has a note secured for $380,000, there's only $20,000 in equity for a later claimant to get, right? The bank has first dibs. They have a first deed of trust on the property. So debt is a form of asset protection. Now, let's say you have that $400,000 property, you've paid the loan down. There's $400,000 in equity exposed. Certainly, you're going to hold title in an LLC, but if someone tries to sue, they could get that $400,000 in equity. So you can also do what's called equity stripping, where we have a Wyoming LLC that will provide a line of credit or actually the money to buy the property. And that Wyoming LLC gets a first deed of trust against the property. And so it is secured. And I wrote about that in this book, Loopholes of Real Estate. So that equity stripping strategy is in that book. But those are good questions to ask, because if you have all of your properties are held free and clear, great for you. That's great. My wife does not like debt. And so, you know, she is happy about those kind of situations. But at the same time, that debt can be reached by a tenant suing the LLC. So equity stripping is a strategy to consider.
Let's say that a real estate investor has prudently, I've used the term harvested their equity in the past through doing cash out refinances or 1031 exchanges in order to keep their equity position low over the long term. In that case, if a plaintiff, being a litigant that has a complaint to file against the landlord and wants to begin a lawsuit, and say then that real estate investor, they only have, say, a 25% equity position and 75% is a lien holder, call that Wells Fargo or call that Chase or whomever. Have you seen cases where the lien holder has such a vested interest in the property that lien holder, Wells Fargo or Chase, will actually hire the attorney to help defend the landlord?
During the foreclosure crisis in 2008, you did see those cases. The bank wants to preserve their 75% loan to value. And in 2008, a lot of those prices went down. So the banks were, not 75%, they were 100%. They had all the property went down in value. So the banks did hire an attorney or hire many attorneys to make sure that their first deed of trust was protected in any type of foreclosure proceeding. And, if we have a downturn again, you'll see the same thing again. So the banks are pretty good at making sure that they have that first deed of trust securing their loan, and they want that 25% loan to value cushion. In a downturn, that goes away, and they're going to fight to maintain whatever security they can in the property.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Previous, you had mentioned a scenario where a Wyoming LLC can take an interest in the property, and that offers some advantages to the real estate investor. Can you tell us more about that? I'm not familiar with it.
In our $400,000 example, let's say you're going to buy a new property and you've got all cash. And so what you do is you're going to take title to an Alaska property where you are, Keith. You're going to use an Alaska LLC, but you're putting $400,000 down. And so there's all this equity available to a tenant who would sue. What you do is you set up a Wyoming LLC. You have the Wyoming LLC put the money in to buy the property. The Wyoming LLC has loaned the money in to buy the property. They get a first deed of trust on that equity, and it's secured. You have a note, you have a first deed of trust on title, and someone looking to sue will see that this Alaska LLC is fully encumbered. There's a first deed of trust held by a Wyoming LLC. If you get into court, you have to tell the truth. Well, I put that money in through a Wyoming LLC, and the court will respect that. There's another way to do it, Keith, and that is where you offer a line of credit, a promise to loan in the future. So the Wyoming LLC says, I will loan Alaska LLC $400,000 if they need it in the future. To secure that future promise, the Alaska LLC gives the Wyoming LLC a first deed of trust. So when you look at the property profile, it appears again that the property is fully encumbered. If you go to court, you got to tell the truth. It was a promise to lend. We didn't lend it. Or maybe because now you need attorney's fees money, you do put the money in and you have that first deed of trust protecting the equity in your Alaska LLC. And I did write all about this in Loopholes of Real Estate. A number of our clients will set up the Wyoming LLC to gain that protection against the equity in the property.
All right, that was a great explanation. I am somewhat familiar with this. Not all the mechanics behind it that you just explained. I learned something there, but I happen to know that a common structure that you recommend for clients there that are looking for entity protection are often a Wyoming LLC because there are strong protections there that presides as a holding company above the LLCs within the various states that a real estate investor owns the property.
Right. And so there are two types of attack. The equity stripping that we just mentioned is for the inside attack, where the tenant sues, is trying to get the equity in the property. The equity stripping reduces the equity in the property. The second attack is the outside attack, where someone sues you over a car wreck. It has nothing to do with the real estate. They'd like to get at the real estate, but what you do is you have a Wyoming LLC that owns the Alaska LLC, the Oregon LLC, all the other title holding LLCs. If that car wreck victim comes after you, they want to get at the Alaska and Oregon properties, but they have to go against the Wyoming LLC that you own that owns the other title holding LLCs. Wyoming, as you mentioned, Keith, offers excellent asset protection. That's why Ted went to law school there, to learn about it all. And so on the outside attack, where it's not a claim against the real estate, it's not like someone tripped and fell at the property. It's a car wreck that you get into. Your insurance maybe isn't that great. They want to collect against your real estate. They have to fight through Wyoming. And Wyoming's exclusive remedy is the charging order, where they have to sit around and wait. Now, attorneys don't like to pursue charging orders, which is why you don't see many cases involving them. It's not a good use of their time. We're talking about levels of protection, Keith. I always recommend that people have a personal umbrella policy of insurance. So you have your car and your home with one insurance company, say it's State Farm, and you ask them for an umbrella policy, which, as the term implies, covers you in greater scope. And that extra $1 million of coverage is only $400 a year in most cases. It's really affordable insurance. The attorneys know how to get at the insurance money for the car wreck, and they tend to leave you alone on the charging orders through Wyoming because it's not a good use of their time. They're going to go to the next case that has easy insurance money to reach. That's how we like to structure things.
A lot of times then the best question isn't how do I win a case? It's how do I prevent a case from coming in the first place?
Right. These are defensive steps that you take as you start growing your wealth, as you start listening to shows such as yours, Keith. You learn all this because they don't teach it in school. That's why I took Ted on these international trips with Robert Kiyosaki. You know, he's not going to listen to his old man, but he sure listened to Robert.
And it's true.
You have to get this information on your own because they don't teach it in the schools. But as you start investing in real estate and start gaining properties, you learn that you need an LLC in the state where the property is located, owned by a Wyoming LLC for the outside attack protection.
You're listening to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Garrett Sutton and his son, Ted Sutton. More when we come back, including more protections with LLCs and just what are some of the common reasons that people sue landlords today. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. If you're looking to grow your passive income from real estate, pay attention. My Property Stats is a deal analysis tool developed by an active investor to cut the time it takes to analyze any deal by over 90%. For any real estate class, you can calculate the exact price to pay to hit your cash flow and IRR goals. Build a world-class pro forma. Calculate the most you should pay for a renovation. Run multiple scenarios with a comparison tool and more. My Property Stats is the all-in-one toolkit for real estate investors. That means more deals, more cash flow, and more returns. Go to mypropertystats.com/GRE now and use the coupon code GRE to get 10% off your first year. That's just $90 a year for a tool that can save 10 hours per deal. No more spreadsheets, no more juggling multiple files. Use coupon code GRE to get 10% off at mypropertystats.com/GRE. Knowing the difference between a turnkey provider and a vertically integrated rental property company can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of your investment. Some companies sell you a property they don't own, renovate it with contractors they don't control, refer you to a property management company they don't manage, all in multiple markets because they can't source enough inventory. That's why truly passive investors work with our friends at JWB Real Estate Capital, perhaps the country's only vertically integrated rental property investment company. They operate in one market, Jacksonville, Florida, and their whole job is to make investing in rental properties easy for you. In fact, because of their vertically integrated approach, their clients have gained 79% more home price appreciation than the overall Jacksonville market since 2013. Find out more about why it pays to invest with JWB. Call them at 904-677-6777 or go to jwbrealestate.com/GRE. GRE listeners can't stop talking about their service from Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. They've provided our tribe with more loans than anyone. They're truly a top lender for beginners and veterans. It's where I go to get my own loans for single-family rental property up to 4plexes. So start your pre-qualification and you can chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even deliver your custom plan for growing your real estate portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is our Rich Dad, Poor Dad author, Robert Kiyosaki. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold. And the reason I respect Keith, he's a very strong, smart, bright young man.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We've got a real treat today because we're talking with Rich Dad legal advisor Garrett Sutton. He runs Corporate Direct. He's been a prolific author of books, both inside and outside the Rich Dad series. And we're here with his son, Ted Sutton, who is really the understudy. He graduated law school. He's passed the bar exam, and he is in there at the Corporate Direct office, learning from dad, not boss. I know, Ted, one thing you're able to do, I touched on it earlier, is contribute Appendix A to your dad's new book, Fail Not Fail. Tell us about that.
It was a great way to kill two birds with one stone because it satisfied my law school writing requirement. And then also it gave me a chance to be featured in one of my dad's books. In order to graduate law school, you need to write a 5,000 word paper about some legal topic that interests you, something that you can learn more about. But Dad, when he was writing Fail Not Fail a few years ago, he said, if you write a paper on fraudulent transfers to satisfy your law school writing requirement, then I can also feature it in my upcoming book. So I said, okay, well, I may as well do it. It definitely was a little bit of a struggle writing it because it was an area of the law that I wasn't too familiar with when I began. But the whole gist of the appendix is that there are a list of 11 badges of fraud that courts look at when determining whether or not a transfer was fraudulent. So usually what happens is something bad happens to someone, and then they have a knee-jerk reaction to that bad thing. And for instance, they put assets into a trust, or they move it into a corporation or an LLC. And then once that happens, then they say, oh, well, I have empty pockets, like I can't pay a certain judgment.
Right.
And courts have pretty good BS detectors. They could say, well, your net worth was $10 million and now it's 100,000. Like, we're going to avoid all these transactions. It was really helpful for me to write because it kind of gave me a better understanding about the law. But it's also a really good supplement to Dad's books because there are a few fact patterns in there that involve fraudulent transfers. But the biggest takeaway that I had from writing that was that you need to have common sense when it comes to protecting your assets. A lot of these people, what they do is they move their assets after something bad happens, whether it's a lawsuit, a car accident, a divorce case, bankruptcy, whatever. So what we recommend at Corporate Direct is just setting everything up before anything happens. So for instance, for real estate investors, it's better to just have the LLC there, buy the property through the LLC, and then set up the holding company. And then in the event that something bad happens, in the inside attack where the tenant trips and falls, they can only collect from the LLC. And then also during an outside attack with getting into a car wreck, then they're only stuck with the charging order protection of the Wyoming LLC. So having all of this set up beforehand is the best way to protect your assets so you don't end up like the people that I wrote about in Appendix A.
Okay. We don't want to be a story in a Garrett Sutton book so much.
No.
So you're talking about fraudulent transfers, basically people that get sued and they try to hide assets or transfer it away so that that plaintiff can't see that they're there. That's what a fraudulent transfer is. And you help people get that in place the day they buy the property, or if they already own the property, helping them set up that corporate structure and get that LLC safely established for them. So why don't we talk more about that and making sure that that structure is proper and as close to impenetrable as possible when we talk about what we're calling that third line of defense here, that limited liability company. What is the best way to go ahead and set that up?
Well, you want to set it up at the start, like Ted says. You want to make sure the title is in the name of the LLC. Some people will set up the LLC and think they're fine, but you have to take that second step of transferring title from your name into the name of the LLC. And then we don't want them to pierce the veil. We don't want them to say that you haven't followed the corporate formalities and thus aren't entitled to protection. And so that's one of the key elements of Fail Not Fail is they pierce the veil in 50% of all cases, Keith. So it's pretty common. And so you need to take steps to maintain the LLC properly or your corporation. You need to pay the annual fees. You need to have a registered agent. You need to do minutes every year so that when you get into court, the court can clearly see, or the jury, that you have followed the rules for operating as an LLC or corporation. And that goes a long way to protecting yourself from having someone pierce through the LLC wall and get at your personal assets.
These corporate formalities, they are easy to do, but probably easier not to do. So really, that's a big part of you guys' role in there in helping investors set that up and then maintain it over time and stay on track. And you spoke to some of those things that need to regularly take place in order to maintain the integrity of that LLC. Can you talk to us some more about that maintenance and, for example, what that might involve with record keeping? You had touched on some meeting minutes. I mean, if someone owns a single member LLC and they're an individual investor, do they have to have some weird meeting with themselves? And then do they need to keep separate checking accounts for all these LLCs? So talk to us some more about that.
The people who are the single member LLCs say, yeah, I have to have a meeting with myself. And yes, right. You do. Keith, when you form with us, we give you a book with all the templates for the minutes. So you can do it yourself, but so many people don't. It's kind of like going to the dentist. It's just a chore they don't want to do. We offer a service where we will do your minutes every year for you. Your minute book will be filled with evidence that you followed the corporate formalities every single year. And that's what you want when you get into court. Secondly, you mentioned the bank account. You definitely want to have an LLC bank account. You want a bank account per LLC. You don't want to use your personal account for handling corporate business. The courts are quite willing to pierce the corporate veil if you don't follow and respect the rules of separateness between your personal monies and the LLC's personal monies. A tenant needs to write a check out to Keith's LLC, not just Keith without the words LLC on it. So these are all formalities that are, like you say, easy to do, easy to follow. But if you don't follow them, the results can be really damaging. Half of the time, the courts pierce the veil, let a tenant reach the landlord's personal assets.
One thing I've always liked about how you handle things in there is you use some common sense and you understand that, if say, for example, one real estate investor owns 10 rental single family homes in 3 states, and say those 3 states are Alaska, Oregon, and Georgia. And a real estate investor has 3 homes in one state, 3 in another, 4 in another for their 10 rental properties. Of course, there's keeping it simple and having fewer LLCs, and then there's having the ultimate protection and having one LLC for all 10 of those. Or when does it make more sense to have just 3 LLCs, one for each state grouping of your properties? Can you speak to that?
In your example, Keith, you would certainly have at least 3 LLCs. If you had one LLC holding 10 properties in 3 states, you'd have to qualify in the other 2 states. So you're paying the same amount for one LLC as you would be for 3 LLCs. And of course, you have better protection with 3 LLCs. Now, can you have 3 properties in one LLC? Yes, it's a client call. We let the clients know that if you have 3 properties in one LLC and a tenant sues, they can get the equity in all 3. But some of our clients, especially those in California, where it's $800 a year minimum, will have 2 or 3 properties per LLC. That is a judgment call. Now, let's look at an extreme case. Let's say you have one LLC and you have $1 million free and clear home in it. And also you have a duplex that you rent to the Hells Angels. I wouldn't have those 2 properties in the same LLC. I'd have the duplex in a separate LLC than the $1 million house. That's just me.
All right. So there is some nuance here, but okay. Right. If you have properties in different states, you probably at least want to have them grouped underneath that one like state.
Right.
This is helpful to know. Now, we've been talking about LLCs as the last line of defense, but are there other instances where a different structure makes sense for that last line of defense, be that a C Corp or an S Corp?
No, you wouldn't use a C Corp or an S Corp for the ultimate holding entity for real estate just because the taxation isn't as good as either the single member or the flow through partnership entity. We like the Wyoming LLC as the holding company. Some people will add perhaps a Wyoming irrevocable trust to that. But, I think the Wyoming LLC for the vast majority of people is the protection you need. It's strong. There's privacy. They don't list your name on the state website. And it's only $62 a year to the state of Wyoming. So it's affordable, protective, and very private.
Okay, because each state has their fee.
Correct.
When we're thinking about those outside attacks or inside attacks, like you mentioned, those instances, maybe some real estate investors are wondering, where do these attacks come from? So maybe, Ted, you've seen some in there by now as well, a number of instances. So maybe we talk about some common reasons that people try to sue landlords or real estate investors today. What are we really seeing?
It's where the money is. People will fall on a property. There are cases that we have where people will see a wet spot in the aisle at a grocery store.
Yeah. And
instead of alerting the manager to clean it up, they will deliberately fall and sue the supermarket. And the FBI has identified a subclass of people who are professional litigants. These people go around looking for problems that they can take advantage of. That's our society today. So you just need to take these steps right at the start. We want to have, like you said, Keith, protected property, the property that's in good condition. You want that insurance, and then you want that LLC because we live in a very litigious society.
So really what I'm gathering and what I've already known, but what our audience is probably gathering is in there a corporate direct, you guys are really preventive with what you do in there so that problems don't crop up in the first place whenever possible. Yeah, I know, Garrett and Ted, I had a different conversation with you guys last week, and I know you happened to mention that, it just seems like it can often take quite a while to figure out what you want to do in life. It can take a lot of time for things to materialize. I mean, you had a lot of schooling just to get to this point yourself, Ted. And when I think about how you guys are preventive in there, one of the things that you figured out when you were thinking about what to do within law, Ted, is that you want to avoid courtrooms. You don't want to spend time in a courtroom if you don't have to. So talk to us more about that and just things taking time to materialize in life. It takes a while for people to figure their situations out these days. The first-time homebuyer, for example, is now average age 36. So tell us about that.
So this definitely ties into what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. Sometimes you get your feet wet in some area, some profession. For me, it was mining engineering, and it made me realize that I didn't want to do that. And then I got to work around with other attorneys before I went to law school. And that experience also made me realize that, I don't really want to practice this particular area of the law. There are a lot of people who like going into court and fighting it out. But the way I look at it is here at Corporate Direct, we like helping people before anything bad happens. And then, as you've seen, they have certain advertisements for attorneys who are quote unquote ambulance chasers. And so they're to help people after something bad happens. So I've had some experience with that, and it made me realize that this is not something that I want to do. And over time and being in law school and taking different classes and things like that, it made me realize that doing what my dad's doing now is something that I want to make a career path out of. And a lot of these things do take time. As you know, he's answered most of the questions here, but that's just kind of the way it goes. I'm a rookie at this. I plan on earning my stripes over the next few years. And once he's gone, then I'll retire, shall I say.
I'm never retiring. Okay. I just want you to know that, Ted. Okay. I'm not going to retire.
Yeah.
I like coming into work.
Not deceased, just retired. That's what I meant.
Sorry. All right, good.
Sorry, Dad. Yeah, I kind of butchered that one. Well, again, things take time.
If I could mention, Keith, the other thing is that people will come to us and say, I have a rental property. I've just been sued. I'd like to put my property into an LLC. And at that point, it's too late. we can't help you at that point. That's almost a fraudulent conveyance. So we encourage people, when you buy that first property, even though you have to take title in your individual name for some bank requirement, you always want to get title right away into that LLC, because once you've been sued, we can't protect you. You can't put the seatbelt on after the accident. You need to take these preventative steps right now.
Can't do those fraudulent transfers like Ted wrote about there in Appendix A of Fail Not Fail. And you have incorporating specialists inside there at Corporate Direct, whom I've talked to myself, and they help everyday investors, people like you, set up your entity and maintain them over time. And they've seen so many situations in there that they often know what's best for you. Sometimes I've gotten the feeling from being around people that they're thinking, these are rich dad advisors, so they must be charging some exorbitant 5-figure fee to get this set up and maintained each year. But no, actually, it's quite affordable. Tell us about that.
As Ted mentioned, we like helping people out at the start. And so we do not charge a lot of money for the corporate or LLC formation. We want to make sure that you set it up properly at the start, and then we want to assist you in maintaining it so the veil isn't pierced. But people can call the office or go online and set up an appointment, and we'll provide a free 15-minute consultation. We'll let you know what everything costs. It's affordable. You pay for setting up the entity, and you pay for the filing fee for the first year. And then in the second year, you don't have to pay the formation fee again. It's just the annual renewal fee, the registered agent fee. So this is not expensive, and you just have to look at it as another form of insurance. You have that insurance on the property. You need the insurance of the entities. It's just another form of insurance.
And you can get started with that at corporatedirect.com yourself. Garrett mentioned that free 15-minute consultation to see how they can best help you. Well, Garrett and Ted, do you have any last thoughts with what we talked about with the difference between formal education and some of the real-world education that you get here and corporate formation and LLCs, and just the fact that it takes a long time for things to materialize in life? Any last thoughts?
Well, I will say that, things do take time, but your listeners are taking the right step to get educated, because they're not teaching this in school. And so you have to gain this information on your own, and just know that you're going to be needing LLCs and asset protection. It's not expensive. It's the right thing to do. And we're happy to help people with it.
Well, Garrett and Ted, it's been great learning about LLCs and protecting oneself, and the father-son succession plan here as well. Thanks so much for taking your time to come onto the show.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Keith.
Oh yeah, I just loved having a father and son here on the show. In fact, it's the first time in GRE history that we have had that. Now, we have had both the real estate guys, Russell Gray and his son, Sean Gray, on the show, but they were in separate episodes. So, yeah, you might have already learned that oftentimes success is not about winning in court. That's not success. It's staying out of court in the first place. For your asset protection, I really like to think of it in a hierarchy of lines of defense, these barricades. And to review, your first line of defense is being an ethical operator. Your second layer is insurance. And like Garrett said, you can optionally supplement your landlord's insurance policy with umbrella insurance, which is quite cost effective. And an umbrella policy covers other areas of your life outside your real estate or your business. And then your third line of defense is that corporate entity like an LLC. And as you'll learn more, investors don't always set up their lines of defense with asset protection as their primary motivator. It might not be your primary motivator. Maybe it's anonymity, depending on your situation. And then there's the tax layer as well. So your structure can also affect your taxes. And that's what Garrett and Ted do for you there. They help you figure all of that out. I have read Loopholes of Real Estate, but haven't quite read his new book, Fail Not Fail, yet. And like I mentioned, you might find it particularly interesting to watch this video on YouTube that should be on our channel today or tomorrow. If you've been a real estate investor for some length of time, you probably already know what Garrett Sutton looks like. But hey, this way you'll get to feast your eyes on potentially the future of your asset protection needs. His son, Ted Sutton, he is 27 years old. Like he mentioned, he's 6'1". You could watch all three of us over there. And on the video, a lot of times we have visual aids to help reinforce your learning. If you're looking for help, like we said, you can start at corporatedirect.com. I'll talk to you again next week. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.